We've got Joe Hill, the author of NOS4A2, Locke and Key, lots of other great horror, here to talk about all that stuff and more on Inverse Happy Hour. Joe, how are you holding up? How's your life these days?
I think I'm doing pretty well. This is the first time I've ever done an Instagram Live. So
You're doing great.
I like that it was so easy.
Yeah, they make it very easy.
Yeah.
And we get these little hearts over here. It's great.
I know. That's so cute.
So in a bit, we're going to do a reading from your book of short stories, Full Throttle, which right there, look at that. Very exciting.
Yeah. A couple pages. I mean, I'll jump in when you want me to, but I have a couple pages from it to read. It's a collection of Full Throttle is the most recent book. It's a collection of 13 short stories covering a whole range of genres. A lot of them are pretty dark, and a few of them are adapted for film and TV and stuff, which is kind of exciting.
Very cool. And I know you also are eager to talk about NOS4A2. Season 2 is pretty close.
Yeah, June 21st.
Very
baby.
Cool. I had a question for you about that. So in 2013, you said the following words: "I don't understand the romance of vampires. They're bloated leeches that live in dirt." 7 years later, do you still agree with that sentiment?
I mean, I really wrestled with how to write a vampire novel. I knew when I got into NOS4A2 that I wanted to write a vampire story. And I also felt that a lot of what defines the vampire story has become sort of cliche, and so I started to think like, well, what's my beginning? What's my starting point here? And for me, the starting point was, what is the essence of a vampire? And the essence of a vampire is a creature that lives off of you. It drains your power to become more stronger, to build its own strength. So you are the prey, you are the meal, and it's draining your life force. And so I thought, it doesn't need to suck blood. It could drain souls. And so that was one of the starting points for NOS4A2, which is this story about this guy, Charlie Manx, who drives a 1938 Rolls-Royce Wraith, and he takes little kids for a ride in the back seat, and he drives them across country through a kind of highway of the mind. And by the time he's done with them, he's drained everything out of them, the whole basic essence. And there's nothing left except a sense of glee and fangs. When they get back out of the car, when he's done with them, they're these creepy little monsters. And with this terrific sense of fun, everything is fun, everything is play, which is sort of my comment on innocence. In American culture, we build innocence up as this sort of beautiful ideal. We sort of worship innocence. But, innocence isn't actually all it's cracked up to be. An innocent child will tear the wings off a butterfly because it doesn't know it's causing pain. It's experience, it's regrets, it's our failures that help build our sense of empathy. And so I think, the truly innocent are also often truly lacking in compassion. So the creatures victims are all left in a state of perfect innocence, and they can have fun on a roller coaster, they can have fun on a merry-go-round, they can also have fun playing scissors for the drifter, which is a game where you chase someone around with a pair of scissors. If you're it, you really don't want to get caught.
Well, let me ask you something. But first, again, if you're just joining, this is Inverse Happy Hour. My name is Jake, but more importantly, this is Joe Hill, author of Locke and Key, NOS4A2, lots more. Please send us some questions in the comments, and I will ask Joe Hill your questions. This is your chance. Ask him about his stories, maybe some writing advice, whatever's just on your mind. So I have another question in the meantime. Speaking of innocence, I think Locke and Key is fantastic. Fantastic comic. Got a very cool Netflix adaptation, but I think what a lot of people noticed was that the Netflix show is maybe a little more innocent, kid-friendly than the adaptation. I'm curious, what was your thought? How did you feel about that? Is there any change in season 2? And what was the sort of reason behind that shift?
So I love the adaptation. Lock and Key has taken something of the long road to
Hmm.
TV, because there were earlier adaptations that never made it to screen. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of things, they describe that as development hell, and they say, wow, must have been really, really rough. But actually the development process it didn't feel especially paralyzing or difficult. Um, I come from the world of publishing, and it's pretty normal to revise a story over and over again until you get it in its best possible form. And I just look at the earlier versions of the TV show as earlier drafts while we were still trying to
Mhm.
come up with what is the best way to present this story on TV, understanding that the comic is one thing and the TV show is another. They cannot be the same. The comic book, if the comic book is successful, it succeeds because it takes full advantage of the form. So it does being a comic book really well. But you don't want a TV show a TV show can't do a comic book really well. What you have to hope for is to do a TV show really well. And so that meant changing presentations. For example, in the comic, the big example we come up with a lot of times is the head key. In the comic, you can use this magical key, the head key. You can stick it right in the back of someone's neck and then open the top of their head like an aquarium. And your whole world of thought is in there. You can reach right into it and grab stuff. Looks really cool on the comic book page, would look really stupid in the TV show, so we had to change it for the TV show. So now when you stick the key in, a door appears that opens into a world of thought that you can actually walk into and enter and explore.
Hmm.
I think the TV show still has a lot of scares in it, especially in the last two episodes where our young heroes find themselves fighting living animated shadows.
Mm.
But I agree that the TV show is PG-13 and the comic book is rated R. And I think, part of that is because, the part of how they got there was, the comic plays with a lot of different genres. So there's some out and out horror. The first
Yeah.
story in Lock and Key is very relentlessly in the horror genre. But then there are other stories. There's an issue called Sparrow that was a tribute to Calvin and Hobbes and Bill Watterson. And that's very lighthearted and kind of fanciful. Some of the other stories really explore the wonder and the magic of these reality bending keys. There are some very dramatic and sort of heart-wrenching stories, like Nina Locke wrestles throughout the comic book with her grief, with her alcoholism, with the loss of her husband, with the strain between her and her kids. And then there's an issue called Beyond Repair, where she tries to use one of the magic keys to fix everything that's wrong in her life. And you can kind of guess how that works out from the title of the story. So the comic book played with a lot of genres, and I think that the TV show was sort of like decided to lean more heavily into the fantasy elements, the Harry Potter-like elements, to open it up for the widest possible audience.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think everything you said, and I'm glad that we got this version of the show. It took a while, but you got there. This is news to me, but according to Ariel Dossi, who's watching, they announced today that Full Throttle is getting the TV treatment on HBO Max. Is this true?
It's so like I said, Full Throttle is my second collection of short stories. It came out last year. Did it come out last year? It came out last year. Yeah, it came out in fall last year. So there's 13 stories in there, and that includes 2 short stories that were written in collaboration with my dad. Big spoiler. My dad is the best-selling author Stephen King.
Oh,
I know, hard to
shocking.
getting you out of left field. So my dad and I have collaborated on 2 short stories. One was called In the Tall Grass, which was actually made into a Netflix film,
Yep. Great film.
directed by Vincenzo Natali, the brilliant director of Cube, and what was the film he did with Adrian Brody? And I'm blanking on the title. And Vincenzo was terrific. a terrific director. He directed the final 2 episodes of season 1 of Locke and Key. So he did In the Tall Grass. And then the other story I wrote with my dad is called Throttle. That one is a homage to the work of Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson wrote I Am Legend, The Incredible Shrinking Man, and he also wrote a story called Duel, which is about a salesman out in the desert who finds himself in a desperate battle with a faceless trucker. And a young protege named Steven Spielberg directed the movie adaptation for TV, starring Dennis Weaver, and it's generally acknowledged Spielberg's first feature. So I was invited to contribute a short story to a collection that was honoring Richard Matheson, and I had always loved Duel, and my dad loves Richard Matheson. I asked him if he wanted to jump in with me, and we wrote this story about a motorcycle gang battling with a trucker who has a secret agenda of his own. So yeah, that was announced today. That's being adapted by a scriptwriter and producer named Dana Jackson for HBO Max as a 2-hour film, and I'm pretty excited to see how it comes out.
Very cool.
This assumes that anyone ever gets to make a movie again, ever. I mean, right now the whole business of make believe is in suspended, nation. There's more serious.
So what stage is that in? Are you working on a script right now, or is that the adaptation? Very cool. Here's a question from Teresa, who wants to know: would you consider writing in any other genres? I know you're not just strictly horror, but have you ever thought about going like totally outside of horror?
Yeah, I'm pretty genre fluid. To me. Genre is like a set of keys. And, when I get a story idea, when I get a subject I want to write about, I sort of fumble through my ring of keys looking for the one that fits that particular lock. I've written a lot of stuff in the horror genre. So NOS4A2 is unapologetically a horror novel. My first novel, Heart-Shaped Box, which is about a man who buys a ghost online, is a horror novel. But I've written a lot of stuff in a lot of other genres. In my collection, Strange Weather, Strange Weather is a collection of 4 short novels. One of them is called Loaded, and is a crime novel, sort of written in the style of Richard Price or Elmore Leonard. Full Throttle contains stuff that jumps across genres. So there's, a science fiction story called All I Care About Is You. I'm trying to think, like, what else? What other genre dabbling have I done?
Well, are there any genres you haven't?
Say
any
again,
genres you haven't written and that you're interested?
Well, the secret of all the novels is that they're all love stories, hidden in horror stories. So it's sort of like, they're like Russian nesting dolls, and the Russian nesting doll on the outside is horror. And when you open up, Horns or Heart-Shaped Box or The Fireman, you find a love story inside.
Yeah. Here's a question from the aptly named user, Welcome to Christmasland, who wants to know, what was your favorite moment from NOS4A2 to see translated into the show?
So many.
Yeah.
Boy, the whole bunch. I really enjoyed seeing the first time that Vic McQueen, my protagonist, meets Maggie Lee, who is a librarian in a place called Here, Iowa. And Vic and Maggie both have supernatural gifts. Vic has a motorcycle that she can use to cross vast distances in a moment and find her way to lost things. So she can get on this bike and go off looking for a bracelet and be in, Massachusetts, and a few moments later turn up in New Hampshire at the place where the bracelet had been lost. And Maggie has a skill of her own. Maggie has a Scrabble bag, a bottomless Scrabble bag. And she can throw questions out in the universe. So she can ask, like, who can stop Charlie Manx? And then she can stick her hand in the bag and pull out letters and throw them down and rearrange the letters to spell the answer to her question. And
Pretty good film.
Maggie and Vic have to team up together, use their supernatural powers together to stop Charlie Manx. And in the TV show, Vic and Maggie are played by Ashley and Jakara, and they're so fun to watch together. They're like, they got a real Butch and Sundance vibe, and play off each other so well, and there's just a real crackle of energy when they're on screen. So I think the first scene when they get together and Maggie shows off her gift, that was a blast to watch.
Nice. Yeah. Here's the one from Library of Beth. This is the username. Wants to know, what kind of stories scare you?
Well, I love scary stuff, I love a good horror film, and I love to read a scary novel. I've read a couple really good horror novels already this year. I read a book called The Living Dead by Daniel Krauss and late George Romero, which is sort of, George Romero, of course, is the legendary director of Dawn of the Living Dead and Creepshow. And in a lot of ways, The Living Dead rounds out, it's sort of the final word on the zombie apocalypse. And Daniel Krauss, the novelist Daniel Krauss, built the novel out of fragments that George Romero had written over the years, pieces of various stories Romero had written set in his zombie world. And that's a big novel, and for anyone who loves those movies, sort of an essential document. I also read a book called Plain Bad Heroines by Emily Danforth, which isn't out yet. That won't be out until the fall. But it has the creepy black humor of, an Edward Gorey comic strip, gag cartoon. It has kind of a Charles Addams, Edward Gorey, vibe to it. But it's also big. It has this kind of big, fractured narrative, multiple narratives in the style of like a David Mitchell novel. And it's basically about this girls' school in the early 20th century, where there's a string of sort of inexplicable deaths. And then in the modern day, they decide to make a movie about what happened there. It's a troubled place. It's a place where bad things happen. And I just thought that was a terrific story. So people were in for a treat with that one.
Nice. I mean, anything, when you say the words Edward Gorey, I'm in. That's all I need to hear.
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, Plain Bad also has some art in it, which is actually sort of has that Edward Gorey vibe.
Very cool.
I like illustrated novels, in the 19th, and I think readers in the 20th century got screwed, right? Because like in the 19th century, there were all these writers who were writing for grown-ups. I mean, Charles Dickens, Arthur Conan Doyle, they were writing with an adult audience in mind, but their stories, their fiction was illustrated. And then in the 1920s and 1930s, guys like Hemingway came along and basically said anything that was fun about literature was for children. Like if you were grown up, you didn't need stuff like pictures or drama or cliffhangers or, any things that actually make fiction really pleasurable. And so I love that Emily's book is illustrated. NOS4A2, my soul brother, Gabriel Rodriguez, provided illustrations for NOS4A2. We had a bunch of illustrations in Strange Weather, and, the book I'm working on now is going to be fully illustrated.
Very cool. Well, it's almost time to do the reading from Full Throttle, but just a couple more questions.
Sure.
From Autumn, she wants to know, do you have a favorite story from Full Throttle?
Probably my favorite story in the book is the one that closes the collection, which is called You Are Released. We were talking about different genres. You Are Released is sort of a horror story, but it doesn't have a supernatural element. It's about 9 people on an airplane flying from LA to Boston on the day that World War III breaks out. And there are a lot of things I like about the story, but one thing I like about it is it has a kind of mathematical purity to it. I think a lot about sort of like underlying structure. And You Are Released takes place in first class, business, and the cockpit. And we go through these 3 locations 3 times, and in each place, each time we return to a setting, we have a new viewpoint character. So you have 3 settings, 3 characters in each setting, and we get the story told from the point of view of all 9 characters before we're done, which is like a lot of math, but like I think makes for a fun reading experience.
Sounds cool. All right, let's I mean, I know the whole book is awesome. That story sounds very cool, though. Let's. I'm excited to get to the reading. Here's some full title first. I just want to do a little post-apocalyptic lightning round, if you're up for it.
Yeah, let's hit it.
I've been asking everyone these questions. They're just sort of off-the-cuff post-apocalypse questions for you.
Okay.
Joe Hill. All right, question number 1. If the zombie apocalypse broke out tomorrow, where would you go to attempt to survive?
I mean, if the zombie apocalypse broke out tomorrow, where would I go? Probably right into the stomach of a zombie. That would be my
good answer.
Years ago, this is supposed to be a lightning round. I'm not doing a good job of answering.
Well, you're try to.
All right. When I was a teenager, my dad wrote a zombie story set in sort of George Romero's World of the Undead. And that one was called Home Delivery. And it's about people living on an island off the coast of Maine. And I kind of feel like, that's where you'd have a shot. If you want,
island.
Yeah, like any of the coastal islands, any of the river islands, in the state of Maine, I think you might have a little bit of a shot. But if you show up there on a boat, you better bring a whole boat full of canned beans, or they might send you back.
All right, next question. If you could help colonize Mars, but you could never come back to Earth, would you do it?
No, I'd be too scared. I tell myself different stories when I'm drifting off to sleep. And I had a story running for a couple months once about what it would be like to be the first artist on the moon, like the first artist in residence. I just think I'd be too scared to go up in the big rocket.
Yeah. If the singularity happened and you had the option to upload your brain to a computer and live forever, would you do it?
No, I wouldn't do it. And here's the thing. Okay. And I was speaking about, deep thoughts while you're laying in bed at night. I was thinking last night, you really are more than just your brain. You are your body, and I think the idea of being able to feel a hug or smell a spring day or something, like I don't want to be just trapped in your thoughts would be kind of an existential hell, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful answer.
If I say anything beautiful in this conversation, trust me, it's a complete accident.
No, that was really nice. All right, this one's a little more poetic, but bear with me. Would you rather be a robot with a heart or a human without a heart?
I've often thought I'm a tin man without a brain.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
And last question. And I feel like you've invented a few superpowers, so this is a good one. What's a superpower no one has ever come up with yet for fiction that you would love to see in a story?
Well, I had a joke the other day where I said, I've been writing Locke and Key now for we're creeping up on 15 years. And I was thinking, how long can I keep coming up with like imaginary keys? Like pretty soon, my heroes will be like, there'll be a whole story about the mustard key where like someone sticks the mustard key in and opens the door and drowns in a sea of mustard.
Like The Shining, but with mustard.
Yeah, exactly. When I was a kid, I used to think like, I didn't imagine what it would be like to be Batman or Superman. I had come across the idea of astral projection in some kind of new agey book. And I got really fixated on that. And a lot of ways, Lock and Key happened because I wanted to write about astral projection. The whole first book is about the ghost key, which allows a person's spirit to walk free from their body. So I guess, I mean, like, I feel like that's an underexploited superpower, astral projection. I think my dog is growling at me through the door.
Oh, all right. Well, I don't want to upset your dog, so let's do this reading. I'm really excited to hear a piece of Full Throttle. Can you just maybe set it up for us? And
Yeah,
then we'll jump into it.
So I've had some good luck with the stories in Full Throttle, and a few of them have been adapted to like film or TV. There's a story in here called By the Silver Water of Lake Champlain. Silver Water is about a group of kids who we're getting the dog accompaniment in the background. It's about a group of kids in the 1920s who find the washed up corpse of a plesiosaur on the shores of Lake Champlain in New York. And that was adapted as an episode of AMC's of Shudder's Creep Show, which is airing on AMC now. And I don't think that this particular episode is run on AMC yet, but we'll get there. It'll be there in a few weeks. And it was actually directed by, the godfather of the Gross Out. It was the episode was directed by Tom Savini. So that's out in a few weeks, but I thought I'd read a piece of the story, and then if people check out the show on AMC, if they want to take a look at Creepshow, they can sort of see how it changed as it was adapted for TV. But anyway, I'll just read a couple pages. So this is the scene where Gail and Joel discover the body. On the shores of Lake Champlain. I'll probably read for like 8 minutes. It's like 2 pages.
Sounds good.
It was a dead animal. It was long, almost as long as 2 canoes lined end to end. The tail curled out into the water toward them, bobbing on the surface, thick as a fire hose. The head stretched out on the pebbly beach, even thicker, spade-shaped. Between the head and the tail, its body bulked up, thick around as a hippo. It wasn't the mist that stank of rotting fish. It was the animal. Now that she was staring right at the thing, she didn't know how she had ever stood on top of it, imagining it was a rock. Her chest tingled and crawled like she had ants under her dress. The ant feeling was in her hair, too. She could see where the animal was torn open, in the place where its throat widened into its torso. Its insides were red and white, like the insides of any fish. There wasn't a lot of blood for such a big hole. Joel gripped her hand. They stood up to their thighs in the water, staring at the dinosaur, which was as dead now as all the other dinosaurs that had ever walked the earth. "It's the monster," Joel said, not that it needed to be said. They had all heard about the monster that lived in the lake. There was always a float in the 4th of July parade, made up to look like a plesiosaur, a papier-mâché creature rising out of papier-mâché waters. In June, there'd been an article about the lake creature in the newspaper, and Heather had started to read it aloud at the table, but her father made her stop. "There isn't anything in the lake. That's for tourists," he'd said then. "It says a dozen people saw it. It says they hit it with the ferry." "A dozen people saw a log and got themselves all worked up. There's nothing in this lake but the same fish that are in every other American lake." "There could be a dinosaur," Gail had insisted. "No, there couldn't. Do you know how many of them there would have to be for a breeding population? People would be seeing them all the time. Now hush up. You'll scare your sister. I didn't buy this cottage so the 4 of you can sit inside and fight all day. If you girls won't go in the lake because you're scared of some dumbass American Nessie, I'll throw you in." "Now," Joel said, "don't scream." It had never crossed Gail's mind to scream, but she nodded to show she was listening. "I don't want to frighten Ben," Joel told her in a low voice. Joel was shaking, so his knees almost knocked, but then the water was very cold. "What do you think happened to it?" he asked. There was that article in the paper about it getting hit by the ferry. Do you remember that article a while back? Yes, but don't you think it would have washed up weeks ago? I don't think the ferry killed it, but maybe another ship hit it. Maybe it got chewed up in someone's propeller. It obviously doesn't know enough to stay out of the way of boats. It's like when turtles try and cross the highway to lay eggs. Holding hands, they waded closer to it. It smells, Gail said, and lifted the collar of her dress to cover her mouth and nose. He turned and looked at her, his eyes bright and feverish. Gail London, we are going to be famous. They will put us in the newspaper. I bet on the front page with a picture of us sitting on it. A shiver of excitement coursed through her, and she squeezed his hand. Do you think they will let us name it? It already has a name. Everyone will call it Champ. But maybe they will name the species after us. The Galeosaurus. That would be naming it after you. They could call it a Dino-Gale Jolosaurus. Do you think they'll ask us questions about our discovery? Everyone will interview us. Come on, let's get out of the water. They sloshed to the right toward the tail, bobbing on the surface of the water. Gail had to wade up to her waist again to go around it, then started ashore. When she looked back, she saw Joel standing on the other side of the tail, peering down at it. What? She said. He reached out gently and put his hand on the tail. He jerked his hand away almost immediately. What's it feel like? She asked. Even though she'd climbed the net, snarled around it, and stood on top of it, she felt in some way she hadn't touched it yet. Cold, was all he said. She put her hand on its side. It was as rough as sandpaper and felt like it had just come out of the icebox. Poor thing, she said. I wonder how old it is, he said. Millions of years. It's been alone in this lake for millions of years. Joel said, it was safe until people put their damn motorboats on the lake. How can it know about motorboats? I bet it had a good life. Millions of years alone? That doesn't sound good. It had a lake full of fish to eat and miles to swim in and nothing to be afraid of. It saw the dawning of a great nation, Gail told him. It did the backstroke under the moonlight. Joel looked at her in surprise. You're the smartest little girl on this side of the lake. You talk just like you're reading from a book. I'm the smartest little girl on either side of the lake, she said. That's it.
Bravo. That was great. Very, very beautiful. Even a gross dinosaur, nasty corpse sounds very pretty. Yeah, that was great. Thanks again, Joe, for joining me on Inverse Happy Hour. I hope you had fun. This is great.
That was a lot of fun.
Really enjoyed talking to you. Let us know next time you got something coming out. Cheers. Next time you got something coming out, we'd love to have you back. And very excited for NOS4A2 and everything else. If you enjoyed this, please follow Inverse on Instagram so you can see the next episode. And you should follow Joe Hill on Instagram for updates on whatever's going on in his life. And be sure to check out Inverse's YouTube page where we publish all these afterwards so you can see the full video, the reading, and all the ones before. Thanks again, Joe, and have a great night. Bye.
This was a blast. Hey, guys, thanks for hanging out with us. It was a really good time.